citizens in the UK, and also UK nationals living in the EU, of which there are around 1 million. We take very seriously, I take very seriously, our moral responsibility to all 4 million United Kingdom and European Union citizens. The Prime Minister has been clear that this issue will be one of the top priorities for the immediate negotiations. I also welcome the encouraging words from across the Channel, particularly from Poland and Sweden, which fill me with confidence that we will reach a swift agreement with our European partners. Indeed, as Beata Szydło said, the Polish Prime Minister, of course, quotes, of course these guarantees would need to be reciprocal. It's also important what guarantees that British citizens living and working in other member states of the European Union will have. This, one moment, I did actually undertake to give way to the honourable gentleman there, and then I'll come back to him.
Is you aware of the survey by the General Medical Council showing that 2/3 of EU doctors are thinking now of leaving? And in general, of course, EU citizens tend to be younger and working relative to their counterparts who are older and more retired abroad. So wouldn't he accept there's an immediate need to unilaterally act in good faith to set the agenda to get reciprocation rather than holding out until the final moment?
Well, I hear what the honourable gentleman says, and as I said before, these issues are serious, important, and people hold their views passionately and with good reason. But the simple truth here is the government has been very plain what it intends. It intends to guarantee the rights of both British and European citizens, and it will do that as quickly as possible, which I'll return to in a second.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend, and I'm delighted to hear what he's had to say about prioritising the negotiations as far as EU citizens and British citizens are concerned. He has said that the negotiations could actually stretch out up to 2 years, but there is no reason at all why an agreement shouldn't come a lot earlier as far as the EU and British citizens are concerned. Will he give a guarantee that once agreement is made, that it will be made public in order to put out of misery the trauma that these people may be facing at this moment in time?
Well, he makes a good point, because it may well be that we need treaty change to actually put in law the guarantees we want to put in place. But I would aim to get all of the member states, and indeed the Commission and the Council, to commit, even if it's an exchange of letters, so that everybody knows what their rights are and what their rights will be, and therefore deal with the issue that the honourable gentleman raised quite properly, that of people being afraid of things they shouldn't be afraid of. Yeah. And this is forgive me for the moment. This is very dependent, of course, on the commitment of other member states as well as ourselves. And as I said, Beata Szydło, the Polish Prime Minister, has made the point publicly here, but every single minister of every member state that I have spoken to, either on the continent, in their own countries, or here visiting, have reinforced the point. They want this to be at the top of the agenda. They want this to be dealt with first, and that's what we intend to do, and it will help achieve that. Forgive me, because I do have to make some progress. So this amendment may well force the UK. The amendment that's being proposed may well force the UK to set out unilateral plans. In any case, now such an approach would only serve to undermine the very attempts I've just been talking about and hamper a quick resolution for all those concerned. I also want to reassure people that Parliament will have a clear opportunity to debate and vote on this issue in future before anything else happens. The Great Repeal Bill will not change our immigration system. This will be done through a separate immigration bill and subsequent secondary legislation. So nothing will change for any EU citizen in the UK without Parliament's explicit approval beforehand. I give way to the honourable lady.
Very grateful to Secretary of State for giving way, and given this government's track record on contingency planning is as bad as their handling of the Brexit process, I wonder if I can ask the Secretary of State that if it's the case that the government isn't going to protect the position of EU nationals, and it then becomes the case that the position of EU nationals isn't protected, has the Secretary of State given consideration as to a deportation process then?
the honourable lady knows me very well. She is, I think... well, that's the point. I think that it is frankly incredible to me that anybody would imagine that I of all people, would sign up to a deportation process under these... The answer here is simple, and I make the point again. I take as a moral responsibility the future guarantees of the future of all 4 million citizens, European Union and UK together. Now, if I may move on to the next issue, I'll now address the issues created by the additional second clause to this bill. Let me be clear from the outset. This amendment does not seek to simply put what we have already promised on the face of the bill, as was suggested by some. It in fact seeks to go much further. But let me begin with subclauses 1 to 3, which do simply seek to put our commitment to a vote on the face of the bill. I will repeat here our commitment. The Government will bring forward a motion on the final agreement to be approved by both Houses of Parliament before it is concluded. We expect and intend that this will happen before the European Parliament debates and votes on the final issue. This commitment could not be clearer, and so subclauses 1 to 3 are wholly unnecessary. This is our clear intention, an intention stated more than once at this dispatch box, and is by far the most likely outcome, by the way, that we will bring a deal back to the House of Parliament for them to approve. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. If he's so confident about this, why can't he allow the rest of us to be confident by agreeing to Amendment 2 from the House of Lords?
As I said last week, because it's unnecessary. When a minister gives an undertaking at this dispatch box in this House, that is binding on the government. Understand that point? Binding on the government. Now, we should... No, I do not. No, that's it. And we should not... And just on the more general point here, on the more general point of votes, by the way, on the more general point of votes, we should not underestimate, I say this with some personal interest, we should not underestimate the mechanisms at Parliament's disposal to ensure that its voice is heard. To paraphrase Lord Howard's wise words in the debate on this matter, on the amendment being debated in the other place, this place will have its say and will have its way. We do not need to put this. We do not need to put this into legislation, and making legislation where none is required only benefits lawyers. I give way to the Honourable Lady. Right.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for giving way? He's a member of long standing in this House, and he recognises, as I think do other honourable members, that Parliament will find a way to have a say whether a deal is reached or whether no deal is reached. If he recognised that, would he agree with me that it would be better if the government officially recognised that position from the dispatch box?
I reiterate the point. Of course, Parliament can, if it wishes, have a vote and a debate on any issue. That's a matter for Parliament, and it's not for a minister. It's not for a minister to try and constrain that. Least of all, this minister, who has used those opportunities before before this day. But let me get to the point behind this. I agree with her on that, but what we cannot have, and this is what I'm coming to about the second aspect of this motion or this amendment, is any suggestion that the votes in either house will overturn the result of the referendum. That's the key point. I give way.
And Mr. Speaker, isn't that exactly the point? It would completely cripple the government trying to get a really good deal for the UK. This is the time for Parliament to get behind the country that made a decision and get the best deal. You can't do that if the EU thinks they can undermine us.
And on that point, that really brings me to subclause 4 on this. So let me deal with that in a little more detail. This clause effectively seeks to prohibit the Prime Minister from walking away from negotiations, even if the Prime Minister thinks the European Union is offering her a bad or very bad deal. And as I'll get onto, the impact of this is unclear. But even the intent goes far beyond what we have offered or could accept. The government will be undertaking these negotiations and must have the freedom to walk away from a deal which sets out to punish the UK for for decision to leave the EU, as some in Europe have suggested. Now, of course, we are seeking a mutually beneficial new relationship we believe can and will work for everyone. But tying the government's hands in this way could be the worst way of trying to achieve that deal. And let us not forget, in December, this House passed a motion that nothing should be done to undermine the negotiating position of the government. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister. The Minister is asking us to take him at his word on trust. Given the record of the party opposite recently on manifesto commitments, does the same principle of trust apply?
Well, I said before, and I'll say it again, I take statements to this dispatch box as binding. Now, the idea, and the point I'll come back to, and the point that is important here is the idea that Parliament could force government to accept a bad deal will only incentivise those on the other side of the negotiating table to deliver just such a bad deal. As the Lord's Lord's European Union Select Committee said itself, hardly a Tory front organisation, the government will conduct the negotiations on behalf of the United Kingdom, and like any negotiator, it will need room to manoeuvre if it is to secure a good outcome. I will give way.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. No one in this House, as far as I'm aware, wishes to fetter the government's hand in negotiation, or indeed the government's right to walk away from the negotiations. The issue in subclause 4, the fourth part of the amendment, is about the question as whether the government comes back to this House to explain its plan and policy in the event of that happening. I would expect that to be inevitable. And yet, curiously, when we've sought assurances from the government, no more than that, not this amendment, when we've sought assurances from the government that they would do that, which seems to me to be blindingly obvious, they keep on being told that they won't give that assurance. Now, I do find that, I have to say to my right honourable friend, a bit odd, and I wonder if he could clarify.
Well, my right honourable friend and old friend makes a good point. The simple truth here, however, as I've said before, is that nothing can constrain this House's right to debate and vote on anything it sees fit, and that meets this. What I'm interested in, what I'm delivering here or dealing with here is subclause 4, and there are even bigger problems with subclause 4. During the debate on this issue in the other House, the author of the amendment, Lord Pannick, himself admitted he did not know what would happen if Parliament voted against leaving the EU without a deal. This uncertainty is itself a strong argument against putting this amendment into statute. However, a significant number of Lords supported this amendment, and this may not be true in this House, but a number of Lords supported this amendment, Lords such as Lord Wigley and Baroness Kennedy, and they made their intentions clear, that if Parliament were to vote against leaving without a deal, the UK should seek to remain in the EU and reverse the result of the referendum. And I should say to my honourable and right honourable friends that the European Union member states and the European Union institutions read the proceedings of this House very closely, and they will have read that and it will have raised their interest, because that's precisely what they would like to see happen. So whilst this has been badged as a meaningful vote, the reality is there are some who would seek to use this to overturn the result of the referendum. The government and the Prime Minister, and good idea comes from across the floor. Good idea. That's exactly, I'm afraid, what concerns us. The government and the Prime Minister have been crystal clear. The people of the United Kingdom have decided to leave the European Union. The government will seek to implement this this decision in a way that's most beneficial to both the United Kingdom and the European Union. What we will not do, however, is accept anything that will put the intention to leave the European Union in doubt. Will my honourable friends forgive me, because I'm coming to the end of my comments? In any prospect we might actually decide to remain in the European Union would only serve to encourage those on the other side to give us the worst possible deal in a hope we'll do exactly that. So this amendment not only restrains the negotiating power of the government, it creates uncertainty, complications throughout the negotiating process, while lessening the chances of a mutually beneficial deal that we are seeking. So I reiterate the 3 points. First, the bill was brought forward to implement the referendum result, respect the Supreme Court judgment and nothing else. Second, these amendments are unnecessary, as the government has already made firm commitments with regard to both of the two issues. We'll deliver on those commitments. Third, these amendments will undermine the government's position in negotiations to get the best deal for Britain, and that cannot be in the national interest. Therefore, it's clear to the government that we should send back to the House of Lords a clean bill. And this House has already expressed its support of this view at committee, and I ask us all to repeat that support once more.
Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their amendment number 1. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support both of the amendments that have been passed in the other place. They started life as Labour amendments at the committee stage in this House, and Labour peers led on them and voted for them in the other place, and they will be supported by Labour MPs here today. The question, Mr. Speaker, is whether honourable members opposite are willing to listen to the arguments in favour of the amendments, which I know many are sympathetic to and have concerns about. Or will they go along with the Prime Minister's increasing obsession to pass a clean bill unamended, even if that means ignoring amendments that would improve the bill and provide much better protection? Mr. Speaker, I'll just make some progress because I know that lots of members want to speak, and the more I give way now, the more irritating it is for those that want to make their own contribution. Mr. Speaker, the government is about to embark on the most complex and challenging undertaking of any British government since the Second World War. The decision the government makes and the deals it strikes will have profound consequences upon almost every aspect of British life. It is therefore essential that government does not fail or take the country down the wrong path. Starting negotiations by guaranteeing the rights of EU nationals and ending negotiations with a meaningful vote will help guard against that fate. Let me turn to the amendment on EU nationals. And my question for the Secretary of State and for the government is, what's the problem? This is not about delay. The way to prevent delay is to accept the amendment and get on with it. Secondly, what is the amendment? The amendment is to bring forward proposals within 3 months of exercising the power to trigger Article 50. The Secretary of State says, well, we want an early deal. Well, if it's within 3 months, no problem with the amendment. The amendment only affects the government's approach if it doesn't get an early deal, and that's why it is so important. And to convey this or portray this as a delaying tactic is not to read the amendment, not to appreciate what it says. Within 3 months to bring forward proposals. I will give way.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I've listened carefully to the argument he's making. 4 million people are affected by this. I would put to him that all 4 million should be dealt with fairly and on a level playing field, and you can only get that from reciprocity. This amendment is not that.
I'm grateful for that amendment. Let me deal with it straight on. Of course, there is a shared concern about UK citizens living in the EU, but this is a matter of principle. Are we prepared? I haven't even set out the principle yet. Are we prepared to use one set of people, those that are here, as a bargaining chip to get the right set of for people in the country? That is exactly what it is. Once the whole argument about reciprocal rights is about bargaining. It's saying we will not do what we should do by this group of people until we get something in return for it. That is bargaining. I will give way.
The Minister seeks to persuade us that simply because he has stated from the dispatch box that this will all be fine and dandy, that is the end of the matter, because, as he said several times, quite inaccurately, a ministerial statement from the dispatch box is legally binding. Surely the truth is it is no more legally binding when a minister says something from the dispatch box than to say that it is legally binding from the dispatch box.
The Secretary of State said it was binding so far as he was concerned. That is not the same as a legal commitment. And Secretary of States can change. And governments can change. And that is why we need a commitment
on the face of it. And let me fast forward to the Second Amendment on that point. Because if there's really no problem with clauses 1, 2 and 3, why not accept them with an amendment to clause 4 and put them on the face of the bill? This is becoming an obsession with a clean bill. Our bill must not be amended, even when it's proper and right and decent to do so. I'm going to make progress because it is not fair. It is not. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my learned friend. How does he answer the Brexit Secretary's point this afternoon? And that was that if and when we pass this bill, and it's given royal assent, the first priority of the government will be to negotiate both the rights of people here who are from Europe and also our citizens abroad. Does he not accept that if we pass this tonight and give those rights to European citizens here, there is no incentive whatsoever for the other European countries to actually concede it to ours?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for that intervention, but I think it is important to focus on the words in the amendment, which are to bring forward proposals within 3 months. That doesn't tie anybody's hands or make anybody's task more difficult. And if this is resolved within 3 months, and I hope it is, for the sake of EU citizens living here and UK citizens living abroad, then this represents no problem. This only represents a problem if the government doesn't succeed in an early settlement of the issue. Now, the Labour Party has been pushing the government to guarantee EU rights for many, many months. The Right Honourable Member for Lee first tabled a Labour motion on this back in July 2016, just weeks after the referendum, but the government has refused to take unilateral action. And I do remind the House of the words of the International Trade Secretary sitting here, when he said last year that to guarantee these rights to EU citizens would, and I quote, would be to hand over one of our main cards in the negotiations. Labour, I am going to make progress, and I have taken interventions on this issue, and it really isn't unfair. It really isn't fair. We do not believe EU nationals are bargaining chips, and I think many honourable members agree. There are 3.2 million EU nationals that made their homes and careers in the United Kingdom. Thousands do vital jobs in the NHS, in our universities, in our public services. They are our friends, our colleagues and our neighbours. They are valued members of our communities. It's often said they make a contribution to our society. They do. They are also our society. This is a matter of principle and decency, and we should not bring unnecessary uncertainty and distress. I'm going to make some progress. We should not bring unnecessary uncertainty and distress into their lives. But that is exactly what's happening as a result of the government's approach. And let me read to the House an extract from the Brexit Select Committee's report, where they said they have, quote, heard a wide range of concerns of EU nationals since the referendum, including stress and anxiety and feelings of depression, to practical concerns about pensions, healthcare, children being abused in school playgrounds, and worries over the ability to work in the UK in the future. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, what have we come to if we cannot deal with those levels of anxiety and stress? And many members in this House will have seen this in their own constituency surgeries. I certainly have, of families coming to me in tears about the situation that they find themselves in. It's time for the government to act. Increasingly, it's only the Prime Minister and the government that think otherwise. Trade unions, campaigns such as the 3 million and New Europeans have made a very powerful and compelling case for this to be dealt with now, as, of course, has the Brexit Select Committee in its conclusions. I'm going to make progress. Labour support this amendment, Mr. Speaker, not only because it's the right thing to do in principle, but also because it would help with the negotiations by setting the right tone. We have to make it clear to our European partners that although we are leaving the EU, we are not severing our ties. We want to have a collaborative and cooperative future with our European partners. We want our closest and nearest allies to be strong and for the European Union to succeed and prosper. We know that in the future, citizens will be richer and happier if we work together with our EU partners to meet common challenges. That message is vital in securing our nation's future. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that given the mixed record of our Foreign Secretary, both in terms of what he committed and the failure to deliver on that in relation to the 350 million a week savings on the NHS, and the poor relations that the government has got with EU partners, that it is right that we should show leadership and commitment by standing out for EU migrants and supporting this amendment?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I do agree, and I've said on a number of occasions here, that the tone the government sets is very important as we go up to the beginning of the negotiations. And from my direct discussions with those representatives in Brussels from other countries, I can tell the House that some of the jokes that have been made about the reasons why our EU partners feel so strongly about the EU have not been well received. Passing this amendment tonight would help set the right tone. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move on to the question of the meaningful vote on the second amendment. I remind the House that as recently as December, the Prime Minister was refusing to guarantee that Parliament would be able to vote on whatever agreement the government reaches with the European Commission. Under pressure, that position changed early this year, but it was only when Labour tabled an amendment to the bill during the committee that the government made a set of commitments on the floor of the House. And they were set out by the member for Croyd West and repeated now by the Secretary of State. First, that Parliament would be able to vote on the final draft agreement. Second, that Parliament would get a vote not just on the so-called divorce settlement, the Article 50 agreement, but also on the agreement on the future relationship with the European Union. And thirdly, that the votes in this Parliament would take place before any votes in the European Parliament. The Lord's amendments that we are considering simply put these commitments onto the face of the bill. And that is why it is so wrong in principle for the government to accept them.
Will you give way on that point?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And is he aware of the ICM Avaz poll published in just the last 2 hours, which show that a clear majority of the British public support a meaningful vote on this, with 52% supporting a meaningful vote and only 27% saying the other way?
I'm grateful for that intervention. I had seen that poll, and that's of course important, but this is a matter of principle. This is the question of whether this House should be able to vote on the deal reached in 2 years before the European Parliament votes and to have a meaningful say. And that's what it's been in principle from start to finish. I will.
Because this amendment does not simply give the right to this House to vote on these matters, it gives the right to the other place to vote on these matters.
Yep.
Can you explain what would happen if this House voted to accept what the government wanted to do, but the other place dug in and rejected it? What would happen then? Have you thought it through?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for that intervention. There's a reason that that amendment spells that out in that detail, because that is precisely what was said from there last time this was debated. That was what was said by the Minister should be the position. This carefully reflects what the government says is its assurance. So that question, the question about the amendment, should be put to the Secretary of State, who has agreed that this, as the Secretary of State, I'll agree to the amendment about that.
I thank my learned friend for giving way. And would he agree with me that given the high level of uncertainty, this is the only sage and proper thing to do to give us one more chance before the European Parliament has an opportunity to occur?
I think I wouldn't put it as one last chance. What I would say is this. These negotiations will lead to, first, I hope, an Article 50 agreement, second, I hope, transitional arrangements, and third, a final agreement between ourselves and the EU. That will define the future of the UK for generations in Europe and beyond Europe, and it is imperative that this House has a vote on that before at the end of the 2-year exercise. I give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend The discussion so far has been about a parliamentary vote in the event of the government reaching a deal. But can I ask him, is it his interpretation of the Secretary of State's speech today that in the event of no deal, the government is seeking the authority to default to WTO rules, which are not rules used by any major economy alone to trade with the EU, to default to those rules without this House having a say?
Absolutely right. I'm grateful for that intervention. That is my interpretation. That causes me great concern, because we need to be clear, Mr. Speaker. No deal is the worst of all possible outcomes for Britain. The President of the CBI has described it as, quote, the worst-case scenario for which many firms can't even prepare because, and again I quote, the cost of change is simply too high to even consider it. Just yesterday, the Director General of the CBI, Carolyn Fairbairn, emphasised that no deal should not be Plan B, but Plan Z. I couldn't agree more. And then research published today by Open Britain warns that leaving the EU without a deal would leave Britain facing greater barriers to trade with the EU than any other G20 country. And as the Cross-Party Foreign Affairs Select Committee warned on Sunday, and I quote, a complete breakdown in negotiations represent a very destructive outcome leading to mutually assured damage for the EU and the UK. Both sides would suffer economic losses and harm to their international reputations. And that is why having a vote not only on a deal if there is a deal, but having a vote on no deal is so important, because it represents a check against the Prime Minister deciding to take this country down the most dangerous path. And that's why I urge members, including those opposite, to vote for the amendment, not against it. Mr. Speaker, I'll give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, but does he at least accept in principle that this Parliament made a contract with the British people at the last referendum, a contract that we would respect their wishes, with or without a deal, and that those wishes would be respected in this place? Does he agree with that or not?
There was one question on the ballot paper, and that was whether we should stay in the EU or leave the EU. There was no second question about the terms of leaving, and it's impossible to extrapolate, but I would be staggered if most people thought that this House should not have a proper grip over the available options in 2 years' time and hopefully beyond 2 years. I expect they would have said, of course we want Parliament to be fully involved, we would expect accountability and scrutiny, and we would expect votes. Mr. Speaker, I am going to conclude, because we've only got 2 hours and other people do want to come in. But these are simple amendments which would improve the Article 50 process. They've achieved cross-party support and large majorities in the Lords. They're the right amendments on vitally important issues. And the obsession with the idea of a clean, unamended bill should not triumph over decency and principle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Oliver Letwin.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with what my right honourable friend the Secretary of State had to say about Amendment 1, but it's about Amendment 2 that I want to speak this afternoon. The operative clause, as my right honourable friend said, subclause, is subclause 4. And that subclause, and I just want to remind the House of this because it's material to what I'm about to say, says, to be precise, the prior approval of Parliament shall be required in relation to any decision by the Prime Minister that the UK shall leave the European Union without an agreement. Now, I've already argued exactly what my right honourable friend was arguing today in past debates, namely that if that subclause were to have its intended effect, it would be inimical to the interests of this country, because it would have the undoubted effect of providing a massive incentive for our EU counterparts to give us the worst possible agreement. I agree with my right honourable friend about that. But I think the situation is worse than the Secretary of State described, far worse, because this operative subclause is deeply deficient as a matter of law. And the reason for that is not just the one that Lord Pannick admitted to, or half admitted to, in the House of Lords, but because under very plausible circumstances, this subclause will not have anything like its intended
effect. And I just want briefly to illustrate why that is the case. Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union is
This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.